All right, so I just saw MaXXXine, directed by T. West, stars Mia Goth. Let's talk about it. Also stars Elizabeth Debicki, Lily Collins, Bobby Cannavale, Michelle Monaghan, Halsey. So this is part of a trilogy. The first two movies came out in 2022. So you had X, about a bunch of young people making an adult film using this farmhouse as a location, and it's a bloodbath. Movie number two is a prequel talking about the people who owned said farmhouse called Pearl. And now we have MaXXXine. Now, if you saw my review for Kinds of Kindness last week, I talked about how that movie is like a visual triptych. And a triptych is an artwork that's divided into three panels. And it's designed to kind of connect all three pieces to create something seamless. Film approaches this concept a little bit differently. So with Kinds of Kindness, it's one movie split into three stories. Now with this trilogy, we have three very distinct stories that are connected by one common thread, and that's this woman named MaXXXine. That man looks like Jesus. Do you need to see all three movies in order to understand this movie? Yes and no. Now, y'all have been getting on me for I don't know how long. Like, how come you haven't seen Pearl yet? I finally saw it. I finally saw X and I finally saw Pearl. I can gripe about that movie another time, in a good way, but I can gripe about that another time. So, at the very least, you need to see X. This movie, MaXXXine, is a direct sequel to X. Now, it's about 10-ish years later. I forget when X is set, what year. It's in the 70s. But time has passed. MaXXXine was our final girl in that movie, and she's moved on to bigger and better things. She's still doing adult films, but she wants to go legit. She wants to be famous. And so this is all about her venture into straight movies, so to speak, legit films. Trying to walk away from her past and be taken seriously in this industry. And in order to really understand what she's running from, you need to understand her past, which is that movie. Now, viewers, beware, because we are talking about adult movies. I'm just going to leave it at that. This movie is set in 1985 in Hollywood, and the current events of the time are also playing a role in the setting here. So we're talking about, kind of the rise of the B-horror films and people protesting those, talking about how there's a connection between corn and horror, how horror movies are satanic. That was kind of a big little push in the 80s, because we're also coming out of the Jesus revolution of things. We're also coming out of that. So there's this weird intersection of things, but we can talk about that another time. So we're talking, Ronald Reagan, and also the Night Stalker. That is also part of this background, is this mysterious serial killer called the Night Stalker, and how this all connects to MaXXXine. Her friends start dying, and she's wondering how it's all connected to her, but also she's having a hard time focusing on that because she has to focus on the first legit role she's ever gotten. This is marketed kind of as a horror movie. I would say it's more thriller than horror. But what makes this kind of scary a bit is our connection to MaXXXine, the relationship that we've built with her from that first movie, and also getting to know her in this season of her life in this movie. So, if you want to see this movie, but you haven't seen any of the previous movies, you'll be fine. I promise you'll be fine. We are given enough information about what happened in that first movie here for you to follow along just fine. Highly recommend it, but you don't need to. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm contradicting myself. So while there is necessary background information in that first movie, and I would highly recommend watching it first, this movie also gives you background information, just enough background information to where you can follow along. But there are interesting little nuggets and tidbits that you're going to miss out on in this movie if you didn't watch the first one. Little Easter eggs, I should say, almost a reward. It's a solid, I'd say 7 out of 10. Is it as good as the first two? No, not even close. What drags us down is the story. The story isn't as meaty. The characters aren't as compelling. MaXXXine aside, our side characters in this piece aren't as compelling. And part of what makes those first two movies so good isn't just Mia Goth, but it's that supporting cast that really adds to her character and helps her to develop more. It kind of works a little bit in that MaXXXine is at a point where she has to depend on herself, and she can only depend on herself. So that independence is there, but because we don't have that strong supporting cast, it kind of drags it down a bit. But Mia Goth is just, damn. I love that Mia Goth insists on being as natural as possible, but she looks like she has no eyebrows, and it scares me. What I love about Mia Goth, just her acting talent, her craft, is that she really operates so well on a spectrum, almost like a pendulum. She's able to swing from one extreme to the other in a second, and she sells it. Because one minute she's sweet, she's soft, she's vulnerable, and the next minute she's punching somebody in the face. Girl, the MaXXXine we got in the first movie was a little more meek and quiet, definitely ambitious and, had bigger dreams for herself. But this MaXXXine, she went through something incredibly traumatic and survived and has the scars to prove it. She's much more hardened and she's much more explosive and unpredictable. And this is where it helps to see the entire trilogy, because if you've seen Pearl, bits and pieces of her character it's that much more. Elizabeth Debicki is just an absolute presence. She's just massive and she commands your attention. She takes up the entire frame. She's just not just talking about her body, but just her personality. When she steps into the frame, you're not looking at anything else. They're polar opposites in a way. I need to see Elizabeth Debicki and Mia Goth in more movies together. It's a little slow, has its boring moments, but it's so stylish and so pretty. I wouldn't even call this like a throwback movie, because you see so many movies that are just, dependent on nostalgia. It's kind of, it feels weird to say this, but this is a period piece set in the 80s. But yeah, I liked it. Okay, real talk, can we have a conversation? Because I watched Pearl for the first time today. Why wasn't Mia Goth nominated for anything? That monologue at the end? Queen.